You're standing in a place that doesn't have a name, because names haven't been invented yet. The ground beneath your feet is damp, soft, carrying the faint smell of crushed grass mixed with the sharper scent of river water nearby. Somewhere off to your left, a bird makes a noise that could either be a love song or a territorial threat. You're not entirely sure which. The air is cool, crisp, slightly heavy, like it knows a storm will come eventually, but isn't ready to admit it yet. This is not the past you usually hear about. No swords yet, no pyramids, just breath and footsteps, and one very, very confused early human holding a stick and wondering if hitting two rocks together for the 8th hour in a row is really how life's supposed to work. And you? You're here now. Welcome to the original productivity crisis. See, you probably won't make it through this day, not unless you find food, not unless you figure out when to stop hunting and start hiding, and certainly not unless you figure out that weird glowing ball in the sky and what it means for the rest of your choices. Before we dive in properly, before we untangle the strange mess of calendars and clocks that humanity's going to invent over the next few millennia, I'm going to gently ask you to hit that subscribe button. Not because I'm going to sell you a productivity app, not because I want you to smash the like button, although you're welcome to be dramatic about it if that's your thing, but because this is going to be one of those slow burns. A whole journey. The kind you don't want to lose track of halfway through, just because you forgot where you parked your attention span. All right, we begin here. Bare feet, sharp stones, a sense of confusion. This is what productivity looked like before anyone tried to brand it on a coffee mug. Somewhere in the shadows of this green, ancient world, a figure kneels by the riverbank. This is your ancestor, not yours specifically, but one of ours. Let's call him Toma, because names will catch on soon enough, and it's easier than just that guy over there with the increasingly suspicious fishing stick. Toma doesn't measure his day in hours. His day is measured in moments. The soft warmth of morning sun on skin, the shifting length of his own shadow, the slow ache building in his stomach that says, stop admiring the birds, start thinking about breakfast. Historians still debate whether Toma's people really understood cause and effect in the way we frame it today. Did he know that the shadow creeping across his toes meant that insects would start buzzing soon, that fish might rise closer to the surface? Or did he just feel it? But here's the weird bit. Archaeologists have found ancient grooves carved into bone, about 20,000 years ago, from places like present-day Congo, that suggest early humans were already counting. Tally marks. Tick, tick, tick. Maybe for tracking the moon. Maybe for counting days. Maybe for wondering how many times in a row they could poke a tree before the tree finally gave up on life. One theory. These weren't grocery lists. They were early attempts at time. It makes sense, doesn't it? The first step to controlling your life is noticing when things repeat. Rain comes, stars shift, hunger returns, and before long, you're counting. You're planning. You're getting dangerously close to inventing work meetings. But Toma doesn't know any of that yet. He just knows that the longer he sits here, the more likely it is that his stomach will start to complain loud enough for the whole valley to hear. So he stands. He brushes dirt off his knees, and he walks. You follow, of course. What else are you going to do? Check your emails? The trees here are ancient too, their leaves catching light in soft dapples, their roots curling over stones like fingers holding onto something they don't want to explain. Somewhere up ahead, water drips in slow, echoing intervals from a cracked stone ledge, like nature's version of a leaky faucet. And here's where it begins. The rhythm, the repetition, the steady, accidental music of early timekeeping. You've been here 5 minutes, and you're already watching time in beats, in patterns, in dripping intervals. Congratulations. You've accidentally invented mindfulness. Try selling that in a modern office and see what happens. But seriously, this is where it starts. Not with gears or bells or phone alarms, but with notice, with paying attention. And that's probably the one productivity skill you've never been taught properly. We'll get to the pyramids later. Right now it's you, Toma, hunger, and the sharp realization that the world isn't random. It just has more rhythms than we can hold in one hand. And speaking of hands, you might want to start using yours soon. Dinner's not going to catch itself. Walking now, the soft squelch of mud underfoot gives way to a firmer kind of ground. Patches of dry dirt and old leaves making crisp, papery sounds when you step. Somewhere behind you, a crow makes that noise crows make when they know something you don't. They're always a little smug crows. It's probably the feathers. Black's a flattering color on almost everyone. The trees thin ahead, and you come to a clearing. The kind of clearing that feels like someone forgot to plant something important here. There's a flat, worn rock in the center, almost circular, like a natural meeting place. And this is where we need to talk about calendars. See, somewhere around 30,000 years ago, humans started making things like the Blanchard bone, a carved piece of mammoth ivory found in France with carefully scratched notches. Not decorations, not random doodles from a bored prehistoric teenager. These marks, they're thought to be lunar calendars, phases of the moon, a running tally counting something important. Days, months, maybe the cycles of animals, maybe something else entirely. Scholars still argue about it, because of course they do. That's practically the job description of a historian. Must love dusty runes, tea, and eternal disagreement. But imagine it. You, sitting right where you are now, but with a carved bone in your hand, scratching lines by the flicker of firelight, trying to pin down the moon with scratches on ancient ivory. It's poetic, really. Humans trying to make permanent marks on things that constantly change. We still do it. Sticky notes on desks, alarm reminders on phones. None of us trust ourselves to remember things anymore. Toma's people didn't call it a calendar, but they knew when certain berries were ready, when birds started nesting, when rivers rose too high to cross. They didn't have appointment books, but they had memory. And maybe, just maybe, someone in the camp was the keeper of those notches, the one who noticed, the one who remembered. Imagine that's your job. Human calendar. No benefits, no dental. Just respect if you remembered right, and embarrassment if you got the fish migration dates wrong. Funny thing though, some of those ancient marks, they don't just match lunar cycles. Some of them seem to line up with menstrual cycles too. Early humans might have been tracking not just the sky, but themselves. Because productivity, it turns out, has always been personal before it's practical. There's a quiet power in that. Productivity not as getting more done, but as knowing where you are in the rhythm of things. Knowing when to gather, when to hunt, when to not bother trying to cross the swollen river because it's just going to go badly, and everyone's going to talk about it for weeks. Now, in this clearing, you sit down on that flat rock. You run your hand across the surface. It's smooth but not polished. Nature doesn't care about polish unless you tell it to. There's a patch of moss clinging to one edge like a forgotten bookmark in an old novel. You sit here, and whether you mean to or not, you're now part of that ancient story of trying to catch time by the tail and tie it down long enough to make sense of it. And it hits you, sitting here. Most of what we call productivity today is trying to solve the same ancient puzzle. How do I keep track of what matters when I can't even stop the sun from going down? Somewhere in the distance, Toma's laugh echoes back through the trees. He's found something. You'll follow him in a minute. But right now, you're here, alone with the echoes of ancient people scratching lines on ivory, staring at the sky, wondering what it means that the moon keeps changing, but always comes back again. Cycles, rhythms, the oldest kind of to-do list, and none of it fits in an app. The crow calls again. You really should go. You leave the clearing, feet brushing through tall grass, following that faint, almost accidental path made by countless feet over countless seasons. There's something oddly comforting about walking trails that don't know your name, but somehow feel like they remember your shape. Overhead, thin clouds drift, pulled gently across the sky by invisible hands you'll never meet. You catch up with Toma by the edge of another stream, this one shallower than the last, the water flickering like broken glass under patches of sun. He's crouched low, staring into the surface as though he expects it to answer questions about taxes or philosophy. But he's not thinking about productivity journals. He's watching the fish. Silver flashes darting just beneath the surface, slipping in and out of sight. It's the original, now you see it, now you don't, except dinner's on the line. You kneel beside him. Somewhere nearby, insects buzz, steadily, rhythmically, as if to remind you that life doesn't pause, not even when you're thinking about time. Let's take a detour here, not physically, but in your mind, to ancient Mesopotamia. Around 5,000 years ago, they invented something that's probably more important to your daily stress levels than you'd like to admit. The hour. More specifically, the 60-minute hour. Why 60? Scholars think it's because the Sumerians loved base 60 counting systems. 60 is divisible by a lot of numbers. 12, 5, 3, 2, you get the idea. Perfect for carving up time like slices of weirdly mathematical cake. And what did they use it for? Astronomy, agriculture, taxes, bureaucracy, of course, because even in 3000 BCE, somebody somewhere wanted a receipt. You know that feeling when your phone buzzes with a calendar reminder you don't remember setting? Yeah, same energy, different millennium. Here's the kicker. For the Sumerians, time wasn't just about schedules. It was about power. The priests and astronomers controlled the flow of time. They knew when to plant, when to harvest, when the gods were probably in a good mood. Control time, and you control anxiety. That's the ancient productivity hack nobody tells you. Knowing what happens next makes everyone calmer. Back here with Homa, though, it's simpler. He's not worried about decimal systems or divine approval. He's watching ripples. He's learning intervals. Fish move in patterns. Water bends around rocks predictably. Light plays tricks on the surface, but the tricks can be learned. It's not a spreadsheet, but it's close enough. Somewhere in this moment, you realize something uncomfortable. Most modern productivity systems aren't about helping you get more done. They're about helping you feel like you have control. Like you're not just flailing against the tide of emails and calendar invites and existential dread disguised as PowerPoint presentations. But productivity didn't start with task lists. It started with patterns, not goals, rhythms. Take the Egyptians with their water clocks, clepsydras they called them, bowls with holes at the bottom, letting water drip at a measured pace, marking the passage of time not with numbers but with emptiness. Productivity by subtraction, a gentle countdown, silent, slow, inevitable. Kind of like deadlines, but with better posture. You glance at Toma again. His eyes are narrowed now, focused, patient. He's learning. No one taught him a system, but life's been teaching him for free. Historians still argue about whether early humans understood time as something moving past them or something coming toward them. Maybe that's why we still can't decide whether we're running out of time or running into it. A fish flashes near the surface. Toma shifts his weight. He doesn't move fast. He moves ready. There's a lesson here, isn't there? Productivity isn't panic. It's preparation. It's observation. It's noticing how the world repeats itself just often enough that you can guess when to lean forward. Somewhere behind you, that crow laughs again. You're starting to think it's personal. The strike is fast. Toma's stick dips sharply into the water, a controlled, practiced motion. There's a splash, a flurry of ripples spreading outwards, and then he's got one. A silver fish twisting, scales flickering in panic, caught in his grip. For a moment, everything else fades. The bugs go silent. Even the crow pauses its heckling commentary. It's a tiny victory, but it feels massive out here, under a sky that's been watching humans try this trick for thousands of years. You're witnessing the first productivity system. Hunger, knowledge, action, reward. No hashtags required. And while you're here, celebrating this quiet, prehistoric lunch plan, let's talk about calendars again, but fancier this time. Around 45 BCE, Julius Caesar decided the Roman calendar was a mess. Festivals weren't lining up with the seasons anymore. People were sacrificing goats at weird times, and honestly, it was starting to annoy everyone. So he brought in some Alexandrian astronomers, and they came up with the Julian calendar. It wasn't perfect. Leap years kept being slightly awkward, but it was close enough to keep planting seasons aligned with religious festivals and bureaucratic deadlines. One obscure little twist. In Rome, the workday was divided by something called horae. But hours weren't fixed. Summer hours were longer than winter hours because of the shifting daylight. Imagine trying to tell your boss you'll send that report in 3 hours and having those hours be wildly different lengths depending on the season. Productivity with a touch of chaos. And yet, somehow, they still managed to conquer most of Europe while wearing sandals. Toma doesn't know about Julius Caesar, or hours, or scheduling conflicts. He just knows that this fish means today won't be one of those sad evenings spent chewing on roots and pretending they taste better if you hum while you eat. Here's your moment of honesty. You've probably tried at least 3 productivity hacks this year already. You downloaded an app, bought a notebook with a motivational quote on the cover, Maybe even tried that weird online thing where strangers yell at you on video calls to stay focused. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You don't need more productivity tools. You need better reasons. Toma isn't productive because of a system. He's productive because if he doesn't eat, he doesn't sleep. And if he doesn't sleep, tomorrow's going to be a very embarrassing footnote in local cave gossip. Productivity isn't about squeezing more out of your day. It's about knowing why you're doing any of it in the first place. The ancients weren't racing to inbox zero. They were trying to keep their kids from starving and making sure they didn't accidentally worship the moon on the wrong Thursday. Toma ties the fish to a strip of bark, primitive, slightly messy, but it works. He stands again, glancing upstream, already thinking about the next step, the next bend in the river. Remember that flat rock you sat on earlier? That's still here, still waiting, still part of this rhythm. Everything comes back around eventually. You and Toma walk on, side by side. Ahead, the water sparkles again, another shallow bend, another possible meal. Behind, the crow finally gives up and flaps away. The journey's just starting, and you're already learning. Productivity isn't a race. It's a pattern. And sometimes, the best system is knowing when to stop and admire the reflection before making the next move. The sky is starting to soften, shifting from pale blue to that particular shade of gold that painters love but can never quite explain. Somewhere up ahead, a bird flutters noisily out of a bush, more startled by you than you are by it. Toma doesn't even flinch. He's lived here long enough to know that birds are mostly drama queens. As you walk, you notice something familiar. A fallen tree, hollow in the middle, resting at an awkward tilt like someone started to build a chair and forgot how wood works. There's a little groove worn smooth on the trunk, the faintest curve where countless other hands might have sat or leaned or tied strips of bark into cord. It's the ancient version of a bus stop bench, minus the graffiti. And here's where we need to talk about sundials. Long before watches, before clocks ticking smugly on office walls, there were shadows on stone. Around 1500 BCE in ancient Egypt, someone decided that waiting for the sun to move across the sky was too vague. So they made shadow clocks, early forms of sundials. Thin sticks or obelisks casting moving shadows to mark the passage of time. Why? Because farming needs precision. If you're planting wheat and you miss the season by a week or two, you're not just late, you're probably hungry until next year. Sundials made it possible to see time, not just feel it, not just guess it, see it, moving slowly, like nature's slowest progress bar, loading the next season of your life. It's funny, isn't it? The first productivity tool was probably a stick and a shadow, not a planner, not a strategy call, just standing there with your arms crossed, watching the sun drift and thinking, right, time to go home before the leopards come out. Here's a weird cultural tidbit for you. The Romans were the ones who really took sundials mainstream, especially after 263 BCE, when they stole one from Sicily and stuck it in the middle of Rome like a really confusing public sculpture. The problem? They didn't adjust it for Roman time. So for almost a century, Romans were showing up early or late to everything, blaming the sundial like modern people blame bad Wi-Fi. Historians still debate whether the Romans thought this was hilarious or just mildly annoying. Either way, productivity's been messy from the beginning. Toma stops at the hollow tree, setting his fish down gently. He crouches, poking at the soft, dark interior with the tip of his stick. You watch him, like you're learning a recipe with way too many vague instructions. Add bark strips to taste. Simmer over existential dread. Garnish with smug crows. And somewhere in this moment, it hits you again. Time is patient. Not you, not me. Time. It doesn't hurry. It doesn't panic. It doesn't check the clock while chewing breakfast. It just moves, slowly, in patterns, like ripples from a stone you forgot you threw. Maybe that's why ancient people were better at noticing the small things. They weren't trying to multitask through life. They were just trying to line up their shadows with their supper. A breeze picks up, tugging at loose strands of grass, making the hollow trunk whistle faintly, like a distant flute played by someone who doesn't believe in practicing scales. You sit down next to Toma. No urgency, just rhythm. No wonder ancient timekeepers used sundials. They were literally just professional shadow watchers. Probably made great party guests if you liked astronomy or awkward silences. You glance at your wrist out of habit. No watch, no phone, just you, the sun, and a timeline that doesn't care about corporate deadlines. Evening's coming now. You feel it in your bones before you even notice it in the sky. The soft cooling of the air, the subtle way shadows start to stretch their arms longer across the dirt. Somewhere off to your right, a chorus of frogs starts warming up like a really untrained a cappella group. Toma ties his fish to his belt like a fashion statement that screams, functional but slightly fishy. He's not rushing. Why would he? The stars will be here soon. The stars, always on time, always in the right order, never sending calendar invites marked tentative. Now's a good moment to talk about stars and how they ruined bedtime forever. Ancient civilizations like the Babylonians used constellations as calendars. Specific star patterns told them when to plant, when to harvest, when to start preparing excuses for missing deadlines involving goats or river floods. The Egyptians famously aligned the Great Pyramid of Giza with certain stars, partly to show off, partly because why build a giant stone triangle if it's not going to impress the neighbors? And it wasn't just about farming. Ancient Polynesian navigators sailed across thousands of miles of open ocean using nothing but stars, wave patterns, and memory. No GPS, no radar, just pattern recognition so advanced it makes your daily planner look like cave scribbles. Obscure fact time: the Dogon people of Mali have ancient myths that seem to describe Sirius B, a companion star to Sirius that's invisible to the naked eye. Scholars still argue whether this is incredible astronomical memory or a cosmic coincidence involving enthusiastic oral tradition and a touch of interpretive flair. But the point is, ancient people didn't just see time passing, they memorized it. They wore it in their minds like jewelry made of starlight. Meanwhile, you forgot where you left your keys twice last week. Don't take it personally. They didn't have Netflix. Toma starts humming, softly, like a tune you almost recognize but can't quite name. Maybe it's just the rhythm of his breath syncing with the slow hush of evening settling over the forest. You sit still for a moment longer and realize that somewhere along the line you've been tricked. Not by me, not by the story, but by yourself. You came here thinking productivity was about squeezing more hours into your day. Turns out, it's more about knowing which hours matter. The frogs grow bolder now, their calls bouncing off the water like arguments in an echo chamber. Somewhere far off, another campfire flickers into view, a tiny orange smudge against the deepening blue. You'll head that way soon, of course. More stories, more people, more reasons to stay awake past your bedtime. But for now, you stay here, next to Toma, beside the hollow tree, watching the last beams of light angle sharply through the woods. Congratulations. You've just survived another prehistoric day, armed only with hunger, instinct, and one borrowed productivity lesson from ancient Rome. Don't trust sundials stolen from strangers. And the funniest part? You're already more organized than you think. Morning arrives quietly, slipping over the horizon like a cat who's been up all night doing mysterious cat business. The sky turns from ink to blue, dragging soft pink along its edges. You wake before you mean to, the way people always do when they've got too much on their minds and nowhere specific to be. Toma's already awake. Of course he is. He's sitting by the stream again, sharpening a stick on a rough stone with the quiet intensity of someone preparing for either a meal or a mildly disappointing attempt at modern furniture making. The water's surface is mirror smooth, reflecting the early light with just enough distortion to make you wonder whether reality's been slightly misprinted. And since we're here, half asleep, watching ancient productivity in action, let's talk about alarms. Not the pleasant smartphone buzz kind, the shouting from a church tower kind. Mechanical clocks with striking bells first appeared in medieval monasteries. Monks needed to pray at exact times, often before sunrise, and apparently nobody trusted themselves to wake up naturally after 3 bowls of barley stew. So they built clocks that rang bells at set intervals, waking everyone up to chant in Latin about the fleeting nature of existence. Basically early productivity podcasts, but louder. Here's your weird cultural tidbit for today. The word clock itself comes from the Latin clocca, meaning bell. That's right, the first clocks were more about making noise than telling time. Productivity's roots aren't neatly color-coded. They're noisy, confusing, and often sponsored by religious guilt. Toma sharpens his stick like it's personal. You almost want to ask him if he's planning on spearfishing or starting a prehistoric stationery business, but something about the early quiet keeps you polite. And speaking of things being slightly awkward, did you know the first mechanical alarm clocks were wildly inconsistent? Some could only be set to ring at one specific hour, like 4 a.m., which is great if you're a monk, less helpful if you've got a meeting at 11. Historians still debate whether medieval farmers actually liked waking up before dawn, or if they just didn't have enough passive-aggressive neighbors to complain to about it. The air smells sharper now, like wet leaves and distant smoke. Somewhere, someone started a fire. You can't see them yet, but the curling scent reaches you like a lazy promise that someone, somewhere, already figured out how to make mornings smell productive. You stretch, bones clicking like someone trying to fix an old chair by accident. No calendar invites, no passive-aggressive Slack message. Welcome to ancient time management. The original miracle morning. Toma stands suddenly, eyes narrowing, posture shifting. There's movement upstream, just the faintest ripple where nothing should be rippling. You both freeze like kids playing hide and seeks. Just you, the stream, and a very sharp stick. Except the stakes here involve whether or not lunch will be embarrassing again. The moment stretches. Then, a flash of silver, another fish darting sideways into view. Toma moves, Not with panic, but with that deliberate ancient focus you wish you could summon every time your phone buzzes with urgent and turns out to be someone sharing a cat meme. Let's pause here, mid-hunt, and talk about the most ironic piece of ancient productivity, the calendar that doesn't work. The Mayan calendar. You've heard about 2012, right? The great apocalypse that wasn't. The end of the Baktun, one of the longer cycles of the Mayan calendar system. Everyone thought the world was going to collapse in cosmic flames. Instead, nothing happened except a lot of confused party decorations, and maybe a few disappointed doomsday bloggers. But the Mayans weren't wrong. They were just misunderstood. Their calendars were stunningly accurate, tied to astronomy, cycles of Venus and solar movements. The issue was never that they predicted the end of the world. It's that we projected our panic onto their math. Productivity lesson. Don't blame someone else's spreadsheet for your existential dread. Weird cultural tidbit incoming. The Mayans also had a calendar cycle called the Zolkin, which ran on a 260-day cycle, likely connected to agricultural schedules or the human gestation period. That's right, your productivity app doesn't sync with fetal development, but theirs did. Respect. Historians still argue whether the Mayans actually used all their calendars at once, or whether it was more of a ceremonial system reserved for astrologer priests and enthusiastic village elders with too much time on their hands. Back to the fish. Another flash, another missed chance. Toma doesn't swear, doesn't stomp his foot. He just shifts, adjusts his grip, and waits again. It's the ancient equivalent of missing a deadline but calmly opening a new tab anyway. Somewhere behind you, that crow's back. Of course it is. The frogs start again too, a late morning chorus now, bouncing off stones and water with a rhythm as old as language. You know that feeling when you finally get your inbox down to 5 emails, and then someone sends you 7 more? That's fishing with Toma. But here's the thing about ancient productivity. Nobody was rushing for inbox 0. They were just aiming for not dying. You don't need a calendar color-coded by mood. You need to know where your next fish is coming from. The shadows shift. You look up. Another day unfolding itself gently, like an old book creaking at the spine. And here's the secret you don't get from hustle gurus. Productivity isn't about conquering time. It's about meeting it. Halfway, somewhere quiet, somewhere with ripples, somewhere with just enough breeze to keep you awake. Toma waits. You wait. The next hour doesn't need to be productive. It needs to be yours. You move downstream now, your feet tracing the soft, familiar give of damp earth beneath worn sandals, or bare feet, depending on how authentic you're feeling today. Toma is a steady shape ahead of you, moving with the kind of grace you only get from people who have long since stopped arguing with their surroundings. The morning mist is lifting, curling upward into the trees like forgotten smoke signals. Everything here seems to know its own pace, and you're just starting to remember yours. Speaking of paces, it's time to talk about water clocks. Yes, before we had the kind of clocks you can angrily check while waiting for coffee, we had bowls of water with little holes in them. Ancient Egyptians, Mesopotamians, even ancient Chinese engineers. Everyone, it seems, had the idea, if shadows are too finicky, let's make time drip. These devices, called clepsydras, worked by letting water slowly trickle from one container to another, marking time not with ticks, but with drops, each one a whisper of passing moments. There's something poetic about that, isn't there? Measuring time with something that can't be grasped or held, only caught briefly in bowls before it's gone. Like trying to track your best ideas before they dissolve into your to-do list. Here's your obscure cultural tidbit for the day. One of the most famous water clocks was found in ancient Athens. It was used, not for farming or rituals, but for courtrooms. Lawyers only got a certain amount of time to speak before the water ran out, which frankly might be an innovation we should bring back. Historians still debate whether these devices were practical or more ceremonial. Imagine standing there, your entire legal argument slowly dripping into oblivion. If you've ever tried explaining taxes to someone before coffee, you get the idea. Back on the trail, you notice how the water clock idea makes sense here. This whole forest feels like a slow leak of moments, the kind where you can't quite remember when breakfast happened, and you're not sure when lunch should. It's measured not in minutes, but in the way shadows lengthen on your path. Toma points up ahead, toward a fallen tree bridging the narrow stream. It's not a grand crossing, more like nature left it there as a polite suggestion. The bark is stripped smooth in the middle, from feet, human, animal, or otherwise, finding balance there. Balance. That's the word that keeps arriving, uninvited, in the middle of this prehistoric productivity seminar you didn't know you signed up for. In the ancient world, they didn't have time to romanticize work-life balance on inspirational posters. Their balance was literal, between hunger and harvest, between flood and drought, between too much and not enough. Toma steps onto the fallen tree without hesitation. You hesitate. Of course you do. Modern life doesn't prepare you for this kind of balance. Only the kind involving budgets and awkward meeting requests. But you follow anyway, one careful step after another, arms out slightly, not for flair, but for the basic human need to not fall into mud before noon. As you cross, you can hear the steady rush of water below, each splash like another second falling somewhere unseen, lost before you even notice it's gone. Maybe that's what the ancient timekeepers knew better than us, that time's not chasing you. It's waiting for you to catch up. By midday, the light is sharp and unforgiving, cutting clean lines between shadow and sun. You're sweating, not from exertion, but from that particular kind of effort that comes with simply being in the world too long without modern climate control. Toma doesn't seem to notice. His face is carved from that early human material called perpetual mild irritation mixed with secret contentment. You're near what looks like an old camp now, a scattering of stones arranged in a rough circle, blackened in the middle from dozens, maybe hundreds of fires over the years. A few charred pieces of bone stick out from the ash. Someone else's dinner, long since forgotten by anyone except bored archaeologists and very motivated ants. Let's stop here and talk about one of humanity's weirdest time obsessions. Hourglasses. Those elegant little glass bulbs filled with sand, used for centuries to measure everything from cooking times to naval watches to awkward pauses between moves in chess tournaments. The origin of the hourglass is still murky. Historians think they appeared in medieval Europe, maybe around the 8th century, but nobody's really sure. They kind of drift into history like someone quietly entering a room already full of clocks. Here's a lovely weird tidbit. During the 14th century, sailors began using hourglasses on ships. Why? Because water clocks didn't work well on tilting decks, and sundials are, well, let's say unreliable at sea. The hourglass was elegant, immune to sea spray, and consistent. Also, it made everyone look more thoughtful while staring into the middle distance. What makes the hourglass strange is that it's really a productivity device disguised as art. It doesn't tick, It doesn't buzz, it just falls, grain by grain, second by silent second. Kind of like this moment here, standing in the ruins of someone else's old meal, wondering why productivity always has to feel like you're balancing on the edge of something. Toma crouches by the fire pit, poking gently at the ash with a stick. He's not searching for anything useful, just participating in that universal ancient pastime of stirring ashes and pretending it's more important than it is. You crouch too, instinctively. It feels right to get closer to the ground when thinking about big things, doesn't it? The forest hums softly, a far-off insect chorus blending with the faint gurgle of water nearby. Time here isn't measured by glass bulbs or dripping water or awkward corporate deadlines. It's marked by how long you can sit before your legs fall asleep. And here's the ancient secret they don't sell you in online productivity courses. Sometimes, productivity is sitting still, just long enough to notice that not everything in life is a project. Some things are just experiences. Fire, ash, silence, breath. You don't have to post about it. You don't have to monetize it. You just sit. Like Toma. Like every human who's ever poked a burned stick into the remnants of someone else's evening plans. The hourglass in your head keeps falling. You let it. There's nowhere else to be right now. Just here. Just this. Just time. Waiting for you to catch up again. By now, the shadows of the trees have rotated like a slow-turning carousel. What was once morning hush is now the gentle rustle of afternoon, with insects buzzing in circles like unpaid interns at an office that doesn't believe in air conditioning. Toma moves again, this time with purpose. You can tell by the way he leans forward slightly, as though his shoulders have suddenly remembered they've got work to do. You follow, stepping carefully over roots, like someone dodging unfinished deadlines. And here's where we talk about mechanical clocks. Finally, the big guns of ancient productivity. Around the 14th century in Europe, clock towers began sprouting up in city centers, not to be polite reminders of the hour, but to enforce schedules, markets, church bells, curfews, power. The first large mechanical clocks were enormous, loud, and impressively inaccurate, like having a very enthusiastic but slightly drunk uncle shouting the time at you every hour, on the hour, even when you didn't ask. These clocks didn't even have faces at first. They weren't built for you to know the time. They were built for the town, to obey it. Obscure tidbit of the day. One of the earliest documented mechanical clocks was in Salisbury Cathedral, England. Built around 1386, it had no dial, just bells, which were rung at key times to announce prayers and curfews. Productivity was literally forced into public life by noise pollution. Historians still debate exactly how accurate these early clocks were, but honestly, when you've been telling time with sundials and dripping bowls of water, anything with gears probably felt like science fiction. Meanwhile, back in your slightly muddy boots, you're realizing that ancient productivity wasn't about color-coded planners. It was about coordination. Imagine hundreds of people suddenly obeying the same bell. That's not just time management. That's social engineering. Toma pushes through a thicket, and suddenly you both emerge into a clearing. Before you stands what can only be described as proto-carpentry. A framework of logs lashed with vines hints at the beginnings of a shelter, or perhaps a trap for larger game. Either way, someone here's been thinking ahead. That's the thing about ancient humans. They weren't lazy. They were strategic. They didn't have 3 monitors and ergonomic chairs, but they knew how to build futures with sticks and string. You crouch again, brushing a hand over the flattened grass, imagining the plans of people you'll never meet. They weren't sprinting toward inbox 0. They were building meals, warmth, and maybe, just maybe, a soft place to sit before the stars showed up again. And for the first time in what feels like years, you stop wondering what's next. You're just here, listening to the insects hum, the faint breeze curling like a whisper through the leaves. One clock was bells, another was water. This one? Just a sky turning slowly toward evening. Evening comes in like a story you forgot you'd started. Suddenly, the light is lower, the air is cooler, and everything smells a little like endings. Toma squats by the framework of logs, tightening something. He's tying with that ancient, thumb-calloused efficiency that makes you think modern shoelaces should be embarrassed. There's a distant bird call, one of those sharp, single cries that sounds like punctuation on a sentence you don't remember starting. And somewhere in that noise, the sky shifts from blue to the deeper, heavier blue of oncoming night. So, let's talk about another ancient attempt at controlling time: astronomical clocks. These weren't just tools. They were art, belief, and status symbols all in one. Medieval Europe, Islamic scholars, and Chinese astronomers all built elaborate clocks that didn't just track hours. They tracked planets, stars, and sometimes even religious festivals. The most famous astronomical clock? Probably the Prague astronomical clock, built in 1410. Still ticking, still beautiful, still confusing tourists to this day. Weird cultural tidbit: some believed that if the Prague clock ever stopped working, disaster would strike the city. And while that's a dramatic way to treat clock maintenance, it shows how tightly people wove time, fate, and technology together. Historians still argue whether astronomical clocks were primarily scientific devices or public art projects designed to flex on neighboring towns. Honestly, probably both. And here you are, standing in a clearing surrounded by ancient productivity, realizing that none of them had timers or notifications, but they did have the sky. They watched it move. They aligned harvests to stars. They built myths out of constellations. It makes your phone feel kind of desperate, doesn't it? Toma gestures toward a nearby patch of dry earth, inviting you to sit. And you do, because somehow it feels like you've been running all year without realizing it, and right now, right here, you don't have to. Above you, the first few stars make shy appearances between the branches. You can't help but wonder how many of them have been used to mark journeys, planting seasons, or simply the start of someone's bedtime story by the fire. Here's the productivity trick nobody sells you. Sometimes, knowing the time isn't about doing something. It's about feeling it. Knowing that right now, in this exact breath, you don't owe anything to efficiency. The insects keep humming that same soft background music that's been playing for thousands of years. It's older than clocks, older than planners, older than inboxes and urgent memos, and somehow it feels perfect. Toma looks at the sky like he's reading a familiar page. You follow his gaze, not rushing, not planning, just watching. Time isn't chasing you here. It's folding itself gently around the logs, the sky, and the quiet hum of your next breath. Night deepens the way ink spills across an old, well-loved letter, slowly, unevenly, but beautifully. Somewhere in the trees, a nightbird calls out, one clean note rising like someone testing the echo of their own memory. Toma doesn't say much. He sits like a folded piece of cloth, familiar, practical, slightly frayed at the edges. You sit next to him, feeling both ancient and slightly ridiculous in the way modern life makes you believe you should always be doing something. Here, you're just being something. A shape in the dark with breath and thought and a pair of slightly aching knees. Now's a good time to talk about candle clocks. Before electricity, before wristwatches, before apps that buzz at you like mildly offended bees, there were candles, marked at intervals, burning predictably downward. As each section of the candle melted, time passed. Simple, elegant, slightly flammable. In medieval monasteries, monks used them to mark the hours of prayers. It wasn't about deadlines or project management. It was about rhythm, ritual, the gentle insistence of moments turning into meaning by repetition. Strange cultural tidbit for you. In parts of ancient China, some candle clocks even had little metal balls embedded in the wax. As the candle melted, these balls would fall into metal trays, making small, pleasant plinks to audibly mark time passing. Historians still debate exactly how widely candle clocks were used outside religious communities, but one thing's clear: they were quiet, beautiful, and carried the faintest smell of beeswax and dust. That's productivity with good lighting and a touch of poetry. Toma reaches for a bundle nearby, unwrapping what looks like an early tool, maybe a scraper or a blade, lashed with cord. Its handle is worn smooth by someone else's palms, maybe hundreds of palms before yours. That's what ancient timekeeping feels like. Not flashy, not efficient, but worn. Used by hands long gone, making gentle marks on the world where they once stood. And you? You're here now, not because you need to be anywhere, but because the long history of human effort keeps whispering forward. Think of it like this. Ancient people didn't divide time so they could work harder. They divided time so they could remember things better. Which star rises before planting? Which festival comes after the harvest? Which candle burns while prayers are spoken over the fields? None of that was hustle. It was presence. The moon now rises like a slow coin flipped into a deep velvet sky. It's not checking the clock. It's not late for anything. It's just here. Just like you. And slowly, without meaning to, you breathe in a little deeper. The way you do when you realize the noise you've been carrying all year doesn't belong here. You let it go. Quietly. One slow exhale at a time. It's later now. The stars have multiplied while you weren't paying attention, and the clearing is rimmed in soft shadows like a dream you don't remember waking from. Toma's asleep, folded up like a forgotten blanket. His breathing is slow, rhythmic. You sit next to the fire's ghost, just embers now, flickering occasionally like a memory trying to speak. This is the perfect moment to talk about mechanical wristwatches, the tiny marvels of springs and gears that once told explorers when to turn back, told sailors when to change the watch, and told busy Victorian gentlemen when it was time to pretend they understood Latin at dinner. The 20th century was the real explosion for watches. Soldiers wore them in the trenches of World War I, not for style, but for coordination. Knowing exactly when to climb out of the trench and into the terrifying unknown could be the difference between life and death. Weird cultural tidbit? Early wristwatches were considered feminine until war made them necessary. Men mostly carried pocket watches before trench warfare taught them it was better to strap time to your wrist than to fumble for it in the mud. Historians still debate who invented the first proper wristwatch, though Cartier is usually credited with popularizing them. But no one argues that once we strapped clocks to our bodies, we sealed a new relationship with productivity. Time now follows you everywhere. Here, though, there's no tick, no buzz, just breath and embers and stars that don't care how many emails you didn't answer today. That's the other thing ancient people got right. They didn't separate productivity from beauty. You built what you needed to survive, but you also carved handles into art. You caught fish, but you painted the cave walls too. Productivity wasn't a checklist. It was a conversation with the world around you. You gave something. The world gave back. Not neatly, not predictably, but reciprocally. You watch the last of the embers drift upward, soft curls of smoke blending into the dark. The insect chorus has faded now. Even the nighttime seems ready for bed. And you realize, finally, that time's not something you manage. It's something you meet, gently, like shaking hands with an old friend who's always been here, waiting for you to stop rushing past, long enough to notice. The stars don't tick. They glow. You sit there with them, doing nothing spectacular, and somehow, it's exactly enough. Morning doesn't arrive with fireworks or announcements. It seeps in gently, like warm tea in a cold cup. First the blue goes pale, then the black trees become green again, then the birds start one by one, clearing their throats like a choir about to rehearse, but not entirely sure of the song yet. Toma's awake now too, not suddenly, just there, the way experienced people wake when they know the world doesn't owe them a dramatic entrance. And here you are, sitting upright, feeling your back remember the shape of the ground beneath it. There's something almost funny about the whole thing. We invented clocks to keep track of minutes, but somehow mornings have always just happened on their own. Ancient farmers didn't need alarms, they had birds. Nomads didn't need Google Calendar, they had stars and instincts and seasons shifting with a regularity you could set your whole life by. Which brings us here, finally, to the strangest tool of all, your own sense of time. Long before mechanical gears, people had what's called circadian rhythms, internal clocks tied to light, temperature, hunger, and habit. You've got one too. It's just buried under fluorescent bulbs, midnight scrolling, and the eternal pressure of being productive in a world that thinks exhaustion is a flex. Obscure but brilliant cultural tidbit. In ancient Rome, nighttime wasn't divided by mechanical hours, but by watches, periods marked by guards or sentries, roughly 3-hour chunks of darkness broken up by shifts. The night wasn't lost time, it was organized for survival, not spreadsheets. Historians still debate how accurate early sundials were in cloudy regions. But does it even matter? Those people weren't trying to catch trains, they were trying to catch seasons. Harvests, migrations, moons. You stand now, brushing dust from your clothes, watching the way the new light reveals details you didn't notice before. Tiny spider webs between branches, faint footprints near the logs, the deep green of moss curling along one stone like an ancient signature. Remember that street you walked past earlier in your real life? The one where you checked your phone 4 times while standing at the traffic light. This field, This morning, this strange companionship with ancient echoes is its opposite. Here, you don't check the time, you feel it. And here's the final joke, the one life's been saving for you like a punchline at the end of a very long, slightly sarcastic letter. Productivity isn't about controlling time. It's about meeting it kindly. It's not your enemy. It's not slipping through your fingers like lost sand. It's just there, standing patiently like Toma, tying knots with fingers that don't rush, but don't stop either. You breathe in. You breathe out. For once, nothing's urgent. The leaves above you tremble with early light, shimmering softly, like the edges of old, worn coins before anyone knew what deadlines were. And now, as promised, we'll land this journey gently, like folding soft linen on a summer morning. It's strange how quiet feels heavier than noise when you're not used to it. The kind of quiet you've walked into here isn't empty. It's full. Full of things growing. Full of people long gone who once built fires where you're standing now. Full of voices from somewhere far away, behind the fabric of now. And somehow, you're not rushing toward the next thing anymore. You're just here, at the edge of an old world that never stopped ticking, just not in the ways you thought. Those ancient clocks, sundials, water timers, bell towers, dripping wax, they weren't measuring productivity the way your apps do. They were measuring connection. Connection to seasons, connection to prayers, connection to the people standing next to you while bells rang across cobbled streets. It's funny, isn't it? We built machines to manage minutes and forgot how to experience them. You glance one last time at Toma, who's tying something clever with vines again. His posture like someone who's solved the whole secret to life, but doesn't feel the need to brag about it. No blinking notifications, no charts with upward trends, just breath and mourning and small tasks done well because, why not? The birds get louder, like a polite suggestion that maybe breakfast should happen soon. And you smile because, for once, it's not a meeting reminder, it's just birds being birds. As you turn to leave the clearing, you don't carry urgency with you. You carry rhythm. Not deadlines, just a steady, quiet agreement with the passing of days. The past didn't master time with machines. It mastered time by remembering that life itself, every second of it, is already right on schedule. No rush, no panic, just here, together, now.